the lack of relationship ties is a strong indicator, similar to smoking in terms of risk to longevity. I want to let that one sink in. I read that in your work, and I thought, imagine being lonely and thinking it's basically just like you're smoking cigarettes. That's a really good reason to try and make some freaking friends, man. Anywhere, any way possible.
Yeah, absolutely. This comes from a psychologist named Julianne Holt-Lundstad at the University of Utah, and she did this huge analysis of hundreds of studies of loneliness, and that's what she found, that it's like smoking cigarettes, it's like being obese, and the reason we think it happens is that loneliness is a stressor, and it sets up body reactions. It sets up more inflammation in the body. It sets up higher cardiovascular reactivity. It sets up a bunch of things that break down your body systems in the way that smoking breaks down your body systems, and obesity and other things. So it's not magic, and it's not some kind of hocus pocus. It's real science that all of these things set up classic stress reactions that wear us down over time.
You mentioned in the book as well that marriage or intimate relationships were more predictive of health than cholesterol levels at age 50. And I know someone's going to be like, cholesterol levels are nonsense. New science shows this. And maybe there's something to that. But I think the point is cultivating strong or trusting bonds maybe makes the rest of our lives more stable. Is that why this happens? Do we know why this is?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. We are learning more. So the last 10 years of our research has been trying to figure out how do relationships get into our bodies and change them.
Yeah.
And that's this kind of stress response. And the other thing is social. So for example, we know that people who have partners and they have a decent relationship have partners who remind them to eat, remind them to take their medications, get them out walking, do all the things that we know that otherwise, I might just sit on the couch and watch Netflix rather than get exercise and take care of myself and see people because my wife gets me to do stuff. And what we know is that it literally works that way. We show up for each other and we help each other stay healthier.
What are some of the differences between the lives of the happiest and least happy participants? Do they have bad habits? Do they have bad relationships? I mean, some of it's luck, right? If you just get cancer 4 times, maybe you're going to have more stress than the average person. But what is there maybe that we could control that you found between these people over time?
Yeah. So really important point about luck, because there really is luck. And some people are going to be listening to this and saying, wait a minute, some people are dealt really bad hands. But the stuff that's under our control is, taking care of relationships, taking care of health, that is the kind of bedrock of making it more likely that you'll be okay. So if you think about it, decent relationships help us weather the storms that are always coming our way. I mean, who could have foreseen COVID? So a lot of us got through COVID with the help of other people. Maybe the people we were living with, maybe the people we connected with remotely. But, knowing that people are out there makes a huge difference. We asked our original participants at one point, who could you call in the middle of the night if you were sick or scared? And most of them could list quite a few people. Some of them couldn't list anybody. And some of them were married and couldn't list anybody.
Yikes.
And what we think is that everybody needs that sense that there's somebody in the world who has my back. There's somebody in the world who would show up for me when times get really tough.
The way that stress acts on the body is something that we're understanding more and more. But one of the interesting studies that you cite in the book is regarding stress and wound healing. So essentially what they punched a hole in somebody's skin and found that people who were under a lot of stress took longer to heal. Is that accurate?
Exactly. This comes from a psychologist, Janice Key-Colt-Glaser at Ohio State. She did an experiment where she took people of the same age and basically same health status, But one group of people was taking care of demented relatives, and the other group of people wasn't. And she gave each of them a little wound, a little skin biopsy. It's a normal procedure. It's done in dermatologist's office. It doesn't hurt much, and it's a way to see what's going on in the skin. So she did it with each of these people, and the people taking care of demented relatives took 39 days longer to heal those little wounds than the people who were not taking care of demented relatives. And we know that, for example, taking care of a disabled person in your life is one of the most stressful activities on the planet.
That is really something. Man, I thought you were going to say maybe 3 days longer, a couple of, that's incredible. I mean, you're talking about 40 days, well over a month for something. And that means that what, if somebody took 2 weeks, somebody else took 6 or 7 weeks to heal from the same thing.
Yep. And think about what that means. For example, if you are really stressed and you need to have surgery, your body is having a hard time healing again after a procedure that you need to have.
Wow. Some of the findings are equally surprising in the book. The empty nest boost, which is essentially a boost in satisfaction with your relationship or your life when your kids leave the house. I would have expected the exact opposite, right? People get sad, their kids leave, something, empty nest, depression. But it's like, no, actually, people are stoked when the kids are gone, which is so funny in so many ways.
And of course, not everybody is the same. Yeah. Some people get depressed, right? But when you study thousands of people, which is what we were talking about, and I found that when my second son left for college, I was dreading it. I thought, oh my God, our lives are going to be so empty. What are we going to talk about with each other? And for about 2 days, I was bereft. And then I picked my head up and said, oh my God, this is great. This is like a whole new phase.
It's so quiet in here.
It's so quiet.
I can do whatever I want.
We can go to the movies when we want.
Yeah.
We don't have to be home to make sure nobody trashes the place and there aren't teenage parties. And, and so you realize that each new phase of life can move you into new spaces and new opportunities. And that's really what people tend to find.
That's so funny. 17 more years and we're almost there.
Are you?
Yeah, I mean,
how old are your kids?
1.5-year-old and a 3-year-old.
Oh my gosh, you are a busy man.
Yeah, I'm in the beginning of, and we're also like, do we have another one? And we're like, oh, we want our life back. And I'm telling Jen, my wife, I'm like, we're not going to get our life back for a long time. We might as well just, what's another year or so at this point?
Yeah,
you might as well.
Yeah.
But it's more like having enough hands to hold the diapers.
Absolutely.
At this point. Speaking of kids, how does our upbringing as children and relationships with our parents or other figures in our life, how does that translate to adult behaviors and happiness in connection with others? I know that's a ridiculously long question, but does that make sense? Like, what is it?
It does make sense.
What does
it
make
sense.
Well,
and as a psychiatrist and doing talk therapy, I talk about this all the time with people.
Sure.
But what we know is that we're not born knowing how human relationships are supposed to go. The way we learn about that is first and foremost in our families, right? So you have a certain kind of father, a certain kind of mother, a certain kind of, sibling, and you come to expect that people are going to be like that. And then also what happens to you with your friends, with your enemies in school, all that. But that you come to have a certain set of expectations. And if we're lucky, we grow up with the expectation that people are reliable and they'll help me when I need help and they'll comfort me when I'm hurt, like all that good stuff that we hope happens for everybody. But it doesn't happen for some people. And that's what we think of as the basis of trauma, right? And so some people move out into the world as adults believing that the world isn't a safe place, that people cannot be trusted. And then often there are self-fulfilling prophecies. If you expect people aren't going to be trustworthy, you treat them like they're not, and you're very suspicious. And then they kind of back away. So what that means is childhood is hugely important, but it's not your whole destiny. what we know is that somebody who grows up feeling that the world isn't safe can have new experiences that we call them corrective experiences. You can find friends who are decent people and don't betray you. You can find a partner who's really caring and doesn't act like your parents did. And that can turn your expectations around. And that so what we find again is this sense that it really isn't too late, that childhood isn't destiny, that people really can change what happens to them in their relationships over time if they're lucky and if they search for good, trustworthy people.
That's really good news, because I think if my Feedback Friday sort of advice inbox is any indicator, a lot of people are extremely worried about this, right? My parents were fighting all the time, and then this happened, and then this person was bad, and then when I went to college or grew up, then my relationships were always rough because of my childhood, and they're just wondering, am I just doomed to this? I have people write in and say, should I even bother trying to get married and have kids? Because my childhood was so screwed up that this is just going to make it worse for another kid, and is there any way for me to get out from under this?
Well, one way is to pay really close attention to who you choose. So unfortunately, we often tend to repeat the same thing over and over again. So believe it or not, people who were victimized as kids often choose partners who victimize them. Now, why would you do that? You don't do it deliberately, but you can end up doing it because it feels familiar. You don't know why, but you had an abusive father and you just happen to be attracted to edgy guys who have a little violent streak in them, right? Because it's sexy, because it feels so familiar. And so what we can say is really important to pay close attention to who people are and to take a long time choosing your friends, take a long time choosing your partner, get to know them well, get to know them under stress. And see how they are before you jump into a long-term investment in another person. And that way, you're more likely not to repeat the thing that you're trying to get away from.